Hey, this is Zero at ReviewZoneHD, and I'm bringing you my first and most likely only Nintendo Wii U review for this year with Disney Plains. This title released just 4 days ago, but I've spent all of this week playing through the entire game twice. I played it over at a friend's house in split-screen multiplayer on all of the modes, on all of the stages, and I've even uploaded 73 videos for it on my other two channels. Yes, I definitely put in my work this week on this game. It's no secret that most games based on a movie license in most cases usually don't turn out all that well. Turbo Super Stunt Squad is the most recent example of how bad those types of games can be. So the big question is, does this title fall into that crummy movie license category, or is it actually worth picking up?
I am rather enjoying this balloon popping bout against you, my friend. I almost feel bad for beating you.
Surprisingly, this game's actually not that bad, and it was a lot of fun playing through it this week, but it does have one major drawback, which I'm going to come back to here in just a moment. Now, this was my first experience with the Wii U, and I'm actually kind of impressed with its overly large and bulky gamepad when playing this title. The LCD screen on the pad mirrors what you're watching on the television with no delay whatsoever, so theoretically you could just watch the gamepad in your hand instead of the television, and the responsiveness of the controls for the movement of the planes was really spot on with the analog sticks on the gamepad. I also tested the game out with the regular Wii nunchuck controller, and I had a much more difficult time accurately and quickly moving the planes around, and the battle races were a lot tougher because you have to use the left directional pad to dodge objects while also using the A button below it to fire your own weapon, and switching back and forth quickly between the two was a bit awkward, whereas the Wii U gamepad allows you to use both analog sticks, and it was just a better overall way to control the planes. Graphically, the game uses a lot of very bright colors, with the sky and the ocean being the highlights of the better stages, and the lighting was also pretty good on the darker stages. However, there's just not a lot in terms of special effects or highly detailed environments. It's pretty cut and dry, straight to the point. Here's the graphics, love it or hate it, but it doesn't appear to be taking full advantage of the Wii U's power. But then again, maybe it is. I haven't played enough of the other Wii U games to really judge it, but to me it just wasn't overly impressive to look at, but it also wasn't bad enough to dampen the experience. They seem to make up for a lack of graphic power with well-designed stages and a nice use of colors. The music's one of the game's best features. I haven't watched the movie, but it sounds as if it was pulled from a big-budget movie soundtrack. You can tell the voice actors like Dane Cook enjoyed voicing the characters in the game, but the cutscenes in the story mode are very short, and they play a very small role in playing through the game. So most of the voiceovers you're going to be listening to take place as you're racing and the planes are talking trash to one another, and it can get a little repetitive at times. The biggest downside to this game is going to be its core mechanics and how everything works on here and how it affects the difficulty. And yes, I understand that it's a game based on a kids movie, and therefore it should be easy for that group, which in fact my 4-year-old was able to pick up the gamepad and navigate around the stages in the free flight mode, but in another sense it's far too simplistic for its own good in terms of what takes place as you're racing and completing objectives in the missions. You have a boost button that you basically just hold down the entire time during the racing, and there's two versions of the racing. One has power-ups and the other one doesn't. The one without power-ups really comes down to who can take the corners the tightest, and the power-up version can come down to who gets the best power-ups. It's not like Mario Kart or Sonic Racing or Cars 2, in which you have some way to skillfully pick up speed or drift around a corner. Doing tricks on here does absolutely nothing, with the exception of allowing you to dodge incoming projectiles. So really, all you're doing is holding boost while flying through a bunch of rings and checkpoints for the races, or hoping for a good power-up if you're doing the battle race mode. Again, the controls are great and it makes it fun to fly around the stages, but because there's just not much else going on to add an extra layer of skill to flying, it can get a bit stale. And it's for that reason that this would be a spectacular game to buy for the younger audience that may not be as suited for a more complicated game, especially those that are going to enjoy the movie that released yesterday, because they should be able to pick the game up and be pretty awesome at it if they have any experience playing any type of racing title in the past. But for anyone outside of that younger audience group, you're probably not going to be as entertained as you work your way through its 28 mission story mode. The story itself isn't too appealing. I'm sure it ties into the movie in some way, but it just didn't make for a good standalone story. The missions found inside the story mode also get a bit repetitive because they reuse a lot of the same style of objectives throughout the entire playthrough, with only a few creative ideas tossed in here or there. The multiplayer co-op is a bright spot, as it provided a good bit of fun in the rally race mode with the power-ups going, and on the harder difficulty setting the computer can actually put up a pretty good fight on certain stages, which led to some pretty intense racing that would come down to split-second finishes. And that's what kind of makes this game a little bit odd. The gameplay itself is very simplistic, but it can also be very challenging under certain circumstances. In terms of quality, I didn't run across any technical issues outside of the planes smashing into stuff during the opening cutscenes that plays just before you take control of your plane in the stages, which was more comical than anything else. And outside of the simplicity of the gameplay, I really don't have any other major complaints with this title. If you're watching the gameplay and it looks fun to you, then I'm sure you're going to enjoy your time with the game, and it could be worth picking up. And if you're buying a game for a kid, I'm also fairly certain they would really enjoy their time spent on here, and it would make for a great family game to play in co-op. But for those looking for a more complex title filled with aerial maneuvers that would make the Blue Angels blush, look elsewhere. This is Zero at ReviewZoneHD, and thanks for stopping by. Meow.